A shot of penetration has proven itself to be an incredibly powerful skill. With massive shotgunning potential on single target, as well as insane coverage for clear, this is probably my new favorite skill in PoE. So the big elephant in the room is the fact that it is technically called a miner. A lot of people seem to be really disappointed in the fact that this is technically a miner, because you do throw a mine. However, it doesn't play like a miner. With the new automation support that was given to us in 3.24, you can make this build feel just like a bow build, except better because it auto-targets. The build effectively has one button, it's right-click, it throws a mine, and the second the mine hits the ground, it goes off. We go after a lot of mine throwing speed in order to make that mine go really quickly to the ground and go off as soon as possible. Mine throwing speed also helps single target because the faster you get your mines down, the more damage you can do. So you can preload on bosses by just pressing your automation key once to turn it off, load it up, and when you press automation again, all the mines will go off in sequence. But for 99% of gameplay, I'm just right-clicking. I've been asked a lot if mines are necessary. Again, I feel that's mostly coming from the place of people not wanting to play a mine build. But the answer is yes, I believe it is necessary. I tried it without mines and it felt horrible. The reason mines are required is because Ice Shot of Penetration fires one projectile. Anybody who's ever tried to aim one projectile with a bow knows it doesn't feel very good. Your damage is going to be significantly higher maybe for bossing. If you built this character just around standing still in front of the boss and firing that one arrow, you could probably get some pretty good damage that way, but it would feel horrible to play. At the end of the day, fun's pretty important, so if you want to hate yourself, you could play this with one arrow. That also leads me to another common question, which is, why aren't you using Nimbus? Nimbus fires your arrows in random directions. Even with an auto-targeting mine, Nimbus overwrites that interaction, causing the mine to fire the projectile in a random direction. If it hits a pack, it's amazing. But if it doesn't, you do 0 damage. I've talked to a bunch of different people who have tested this, and they say, yeah, it's not worth using. Even with the extra damage that you'd get from return projectiles with Nimbus, it is not worth using. You simply miss too often. On single target, you'd have to make sure your mines were directly under the boss, or else you'd always miss. And then anytime the boss moves, you do 0 damage. So do not use a Nimbus in this build. It is not worth it. It's probably a good time to let you know, if you have not seen my previous video, that you definitely need to go watch it. Ice Shot mechanics are covered top to bottom in that video, so go check that out, link in the description. So this version of the build is actually probably not the one that I think is the best version. When I first started putting this together, I really just wanted to min-max the number of arrows I was getting, partially because I didn't realize quite how powerful this would be. Once I tested Fury Valve with Ice Shot, I couldn't believe how good the clear was, but I didn't quite understand how well it would shotgun on single target, so my goal was to just make a fast mapper. This build is absolutely that. It does have some decent bossing capabilities, but I wouldn't play a Deadeye to kill uber bosses. I was able to take down Lycia in the tier 17 map. I was able to farm tier 17 maps. Again, I hate tier 17s, but this build is the best one I've played for them so far. It does a ridiculous amount of damage, a ridiculous amount of coverage, but this is just my first iteration of the build. I'll talk about the decisions that I made for each gear piece and the Deadeye Ascendancy specifically, and then potentially talk about the next version that I'm going to try playing. So if you are going to play this build, please watch the whole video. You may want to make different decisions than I did, but let's get into it. Ice Shot of Penetration, Fury Valve, Deadeye. If you're enjoying this kind of content, make sure to like the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming and more Ice Shot of Penetration content. You can also check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. Thank you so much. Okay, well, here we have the Popsicle Predator. That's the name that ChatGPT came up with when we asked it to give us some edgy names related to Ice Shot of Penetration. The full name it gave us was actually the Penetrating Popsicle Predator, but unfortunately, GGG doesn't support that many characters, so GGG, please fix. So some of this gear is incredibly expensive and some of this is 1C. We'll go through our gear first and we'll talk about this bow. Basically what your goal is on a bow is to get as much physical damage as possible in this particular setup, because I'm running Hatred, as well as additional arrows. The more arrows you have, the better your clear and the more your shotgun. Now, this can be pretty expensive, and I ultimately didn't feel like making my own bow, but luckily our good buddy Fearless Dumbo decided he wanted to try this build out as well, and he has made a graveyard crafting guide that I will link down below. The goal of his graveyard craft was basically to get as many fractures as possible of physical damage as prefixes, or crit chance or crit multi as suffixes. The idea is to get 3 fractures and then be able to get a +2 arrow bow afterwards. I'm not an expert in this craft, but he was kind enough to provide his graveyard layout. You can get yourself a pretty good bow for anywhere from 5 to 15 divines, But how far you want to push it is up to you. I started this build with a 5 divine bow, and I was actually able to complete a tier 16 with it. Sorry, a tier 17 with it. It didn't have any additional arrows, and it had a dead suffix on it. So you don't need this kind of bow to play this build, obviously. But if you are looking to make something very endgame, check out that link. I decided that because I only play basically a 1-button build, I could add focus in for 30% double damage. Tend to not need this unless you're bossing, so I don't even know if this is better than just regular double damage for better damage uptime, but it gives you a nice burst. We went for a heat shiver. I also am not certain that this is the right move, because if you're not freezing, you're not getting the effects of the heat shiver fully. And while it is really good damage, there's so much that you can do with a rare. I think for the trickster version, I'm actually gonna go for a rare helmet. So stick around for that. The amulet, this is the most important item on the build. You absolutely have to have this item to play this build. The reason that this is so important is because without it, you simply just fire 1 projectile for my shot of penetration, and you don't get the splits, you don't get all of the crazy shotgunning interactions. This is a super cheap item. I have Savagery on here to give us an additional frenzy charge for more throwing speed and more damage. Our quiver, we painstakingly crafted this ourselves. We've had to fracture our own arrow on here, and we ended up spending like 40 divines. You can spend a couple of divines and get something pretty close to this, so I just recommend buying something. But things that you want: damage with bow skills, life, physical damage to attacks, crit multi, and then we had to craft on a pretty good crafted suffix of crit chance and elemental damage. You could go for a projectile speed quiver here, but the faster your projectiles are, the faster they return, which means you're less likely to have new tornadoes created by the time they return. When you create a new tornado, you can hit that with the original projectile again, allowing for a little bit more shotgunning effect. This ring was 20 divines. I was just trying to solve as much as I could with this. Got a ton of life, LE damage with attacks, and -8. Our mana cost is 10, so on the other ring, I really should have minus mana cost to make it a little bit easier to sustain, but with 10 mana, I didn't find it to be a problem. On the other ring, we're solving resistance problems, and we needed a little bit of accuracy, and we got crafted life. The boots are just your typical shock avoid boots. You actually don't need to get 100% here because you have 20% on the tree, so you only need to get this to 80, so you could just go for the tier 1 of the Searing Exarch implicit. I forgot that I had 20 on the tree until I started rolling for it, so I figured it would be easier to sell if they had the tier 3 on it anyway. But other than that, just looking for a little bit of res, some life, and some move speed. I bought these boots with these 2 prefixes fractured already, just to make it a little bit easier. We are using a Headhunter belt because 1, it's insanely cheap, but 2, because it is probably the best build I've ever played for Headhunter. Not only does our single target scale with projectiles, but it scales with area of effect. The better your AoE, the more likely you are to shotgun, especially off of walls. And we also are a Fizz build that gets Fizz as extra. Headhunter is insane with this build. It's so much fun. The only way I would drop this is maybe if I decided I wanted to make this into an Uber bosser. I may ditch it on the Trickster, we'll see. Also, we need the stats. Machinamids are phenomenal. They give us a ton of life recovery that you normally can't get with a mine build. So we do have some leech and mana leech from our ensnaring arrow setup. It actually does a decent bit of damage and does give us leech, but I wanted a ton of instant leech. And with this, you can pretty much face tank anything that doesn't one-shot you, which is tend to be the way that I like to play the game. I love really high recovery builds. And with this, all of our shotguns and our instant leech that we are getting from the tree here, we are also getting mana leech from our ensnaring arrow, but then we get instant leech. Instant leech with this many mines per second and this many overlaps is thousands and thousands of life per second. You'll see when you're in combat, if you take a huge hit, it's instantly full. Aside from that, unique gloves are great for corruptions. Best in slot would be frenzy charge and attack crit. There weren't any online, but I think I paid 2 divines for these with life and a frenzy charge, but these are not mandatory if you care a little bit less about your life recovery, and I probably won't go for these on the Trickster. Sorry to continue teasing the Trickster build, but I'm really excited to just try this skill another way. Quickly talk about the Flasks. I did not put a lot of effort into these Flasks. You definitely don't need a life pot because of your crazy recovery from your gloves, so that gives us a little bit more flexibility. I'm basically using a silver flask for the move speed because we don't actually get any benefits from attack speed. We get some reduced curses and then more move speed on the Quicksilver. We have an evasion flask that is just evasion. This helps us get up to almost 80% even without running Grace. A Taste of Hate, this is phenomenal for this build. The offense and the defense are both great. Fizz's extra is massive for us, as well as Fizz taken as. We don't have that many sources of Fizz mitigation, so definitely weak to Fizz on this build, but we'll get into that. And then lastly, I used a Quartz Flask specifically for the phasing. because I couldn't get it from on-kill sources because we are a mine build, and I actually think I'm overcapped on crit now that I have a Hatred Watcher's Eye. This Quartz Flask should be replaced with a Dying Sun. For mapping, it's unquestionably the best. Single target, you're not going to be able to keep it up for very long, so it's probably not worth it in that scenario. Okay, let's talk about the gems. In our main setup, we have Ice Shot of Penetration. 23 quality is the best corruption for this. Increased area of effect angle makes your cones cover more of your screen and more likely to overlap. 21 is not important. We'll come back to this gem last. We use High Impact Mine to turn this into a mine. It's slightly better for mapping than Blast Chain because Blast Chain has a bigger downside. However, you're going to get a little bit more damage probably from Blast Chain mines if you are doing single target and stacking up and preloading your mines. We use Return Projectiles to get the shotgunning effect on the tornado and lots more coverage. Increased crit damage, no brainer. And then Charge Mine gives us a ton of throwing speed. It gives us power and frenzy generation. It's just a phenomenal support. Lastly, we're using Awaken Vicious Proj. We don't get the downside of the less attack speed, which is really nice, so it's just more attack damage. But I'm not exactly sure that this is the best. I used an Enhance for even more cone angle. That felt pretty good. I used GMP. That felt pretty good as well, but then your hit damage is lower, so you're less likely to get freezes on bosses. Ultimately, I think this might be the best, but I'm going to continue to do more testing. And then when I go play the Trickster version, I'm going to do more testing. But GMP, Vicious Proj, and Enhance are all phenomenal. But with lower damage or lower number of projectiles, you may want to switch it around and see which one is best for you. In our helmet, we have Enduring Cry and Call to Arms. This is generating us some life regen from time to time and endurance charges, which we expend with Immortal Call on automation. This is giving us pretty good uptime of our Immortal Call. As long as you are generating some endurance charges, the Immortal Call will be going off for longer. The problem is it's really only useful on bosses because we clear screens so quickly that there's never any enemies nearby for Enduring Cry to actually capitalize on. So I don't know that this is the best setup, but Immortal Call automation is pretty nice. We also have Enhance here to make our Immortal Call have a better cooldown. And then also a Detonate Mines. Detonate Mines on automation is what causes the mine to go off. You press spacebar, and then every single mine will cast the second you throw it. I have it off right now, so it's not constantly doing my Immortal Call. Our aura setup over here, we have Hatred and Skitterbots. Skitterbots is linked to Bone Chill support to get more of a chill effect on the enemy. It makes enemies take more damage, and it also makes them more likely to be at cap for Heat Shiver. We use a Flame Dash for movement. The build is very fast, so I didn't find it necessary to use anything else. I had a Blink Arrow with faster attacks, but when you take faster attacks off of Blink Arrow with low attack speed, it doesn't feel very good, so I recommend Flame Dash. Lastly, we'll talk about kind of the crux of our shotgunning damage, which is our Mana Forged setup. So we use Mana Forged arrows alongside of Ensnaring Arrow. Ensnaring Arrow actually does a good bit of damage in this build. It's enough to clear up stragglers because it auto-targets. We hook it to life tap so it goes off every time we throw a mine, and then we have Cast on Crit. We're using Cast on Critical Strike in order to get tornadoes to go off as often as possible. Every time we throw a mine, it triggers our Ensnaring Arrow, which goes and hits the enemy, which crits because it's 100% crit with increased crit strikes. It may be without this now. I might be able to drop this and put something else here. It's causing tornadoes to constantly be replaced. The reason that that's important is you can only hit your tornado for the first 1.5 seconds. That's the base duration. You could make that longer with increased duration, but I don't think it's worth it. So as you are attacking a boss, you are triggering your tornado over and over again. It is resetting as long as it resets once every 1.5 seconds. You're going to be able to hit it a bunch, but the more you replace it, the more you can shotgun on it. The first tornado gets placed, it can be hit once by a return projectile, but if there is still a projectile that is on its way back from that first attack and you put out a new tornado, that projectile can hit as well. It makes for some really, really big shotgun potential, and this setup does a ridiculous amount of our damage for us alongside of the Ice Shot. The tree is particularly designed for a mapping setup. We don't take any of the detonation speed because detonation speed doesn't matter when you're only throwing one mine at a time. It is instant. Detonation speed only matters when you are throwing a number of mines. That speed in between each one detonating is increased by these nodes here, and I don't have them because I'm not really bossing. If you are bossing, you absolutely want to take these. So we grab a Lethal Pride here for things like resistance, which were difficult to get with all the uniques in the build. We get some double damage, some intimidate, and some more fire res, and then a bunch of strength along the way to help us get to a pretty high strength number. We use the Thread of Hope here. This is pretty much mandatory because these arrows have attack speed on the way, which is completely useless to us. So you'd have to take 6 dead nodes to get these arrows. So you pretty much don't want to play this without this Thread of Hope. We also grab a bunch of really high value nodes along the way to make this Thread of Hope really worth it. A couple of tattoos for cold res to get me capped. We have a lot of extra decks that you could tattoo with movement speed, with spell suppress. If you're not accuracy capped, there's a lot you could do here. I tend to not put too many tattoos in my builds these days because folks don't really like buying them. They don't have them because nobody's farming them. So even though they're cheap, I feel like it's kind of a turn off for people, but please make use of your decks here. Because we are a bow build, we do take the bow nodes on the tree that are high value, but we also get to take mine nodes that are high value. We get 10% pen, we get a bunch of crit multi, and then we still get to take things like the elemental mastery, which inverts res. This is super, super strong, especially with heat shiver. We convert the rest of our cold we convert the rest of our fizz to cold with the cold mastery down here. And then we take point blank. So I'll talk about point blank when I talk about the Ascendancy, but let's quickly talk about our clusters. Disorienting display blinds enemies when you use an elemental skill. Ice shot is a elemental skill, so every mine you throw will cause a 10% chance to blind enemies. This is pretty much full uptime of blind, but you can add blind to attacks from tattoos if you don't get this, but blind is very important. We get blanketed snow here. Don't worry about this too much. It's only like 6 or 7% damage, and it's always super expensive. So really, I would just get disorienting and then something else good here. For our medium clusters, I decided to go for a bunch of area of effect. I don't know how necessary this is. It certainly makes clear much nicer. You can tell the difference. So we're getting 15 AoE, 10 here, 15 here, and 10 here. It probably isn't necessary, and you could go for damage here. But again, I was building this to be as much of a clear speed build as I could. We have a Crit Watcher's Eye. It's the only mod on there. It's just to get us to crit cap because it's just so much damage. We have a Corrupted Blood Jewel here with a bunch of mods that tend to not go together, but in this case do. So multi with elemental skills, damage with bows, and mind damage. I think I only paid like a divine for this. Here we have a Storm Shroud to go along with our boots to get fully shock immune, and then we also get more reduced effective curses. So we have very little curse effect on us while we are mapping, and our flask is up. So lastly, let's talk about the Ascendancy. So point blank makes you deal more damage to targets at the start of their movement. Far shot makes you deal more damage at the end of the movement. So the farther away it is, the more of a penalty point blank is, and the closer it is, the more of a penalty that far shot is. Because chaining doesn't really help us, this node is not very good. Chain comes after split and pierce, so only once 3 enemies have been pierced after the split will it chain. And it just didn't really seem to add much value to the build. So what we did was we did a combo of far shot and point blank. This seems unintuitive, but actually these do work together to create a decent damage curve. I'll put that on screen now. You start with a little bit more damage than on average, and you end with a little bit more damage than on average. Projectiles in the middle get a good more damage multiplier. Endless Munitions was just the most projectiles I could get. That's why we went Deadeye, and also Gathering Winds. We're throwing mines so fast that this is pretty much always capped, and it feels really good to go fast. Lastly, Focal Point gives us Mark Effect, which is more Sniper's Mark damage, as well as your mark transfers to another enemy when the marked enemy dies. Again, just more damage on average, and there was really nothing else that I felt like taking. We're using Here's Ire. I don't even have corruptions on this. It's really nice for a massive amount of evasion, which we need because we're not running Grace. 30 spell suppress, and then a bunch of flat cold damage to bow attacks. It's really nice value for fairly cheap. Corruptions you might want to look for. Increased damage. You could get like +2 trap and mine, which would support your support gems here. Things like that. It's not super important. I don't know that Here's Ire is the best for this, but I think in the Deadeye setup, it probably is. Again, stay tuned for the Trickster to see how I decide to build that one. Okay, I think that just about wraps it up. Hope you enjoy this build if you decide to play it. Definitely come check out the stream. I'm going to be doing some theory crafting on the Trickster today on stream, right after this video goes live. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, like and comment down below. Hit that little notification bell so you get some alerts every time I post a new video. You can also join my Discord, check me out on Twitch, drop that Twitch Prime. I've even got a merch store, tons of links, check them all out in the description below. I really appreciate all you guys watching. I know D4 just got launched, so if you're here checking out the PoE content, thanks for coming. I'll be playing PoE pretty much all league. Thank you all for being here, and as always, take care.